And why are we excited, my friends? He finally did it! He lowered the floor, lowered the ceiling. I've begged, I've pleaded. The Flyers made a trade.
He did this all because of you.
Joel Farabee.
You know this, right?
Well, you know what? It's about damn time somebody listened. I'm loud enough. Joel Farabee, Morgan Frost moved out. We thank them for their contributions to this team. We could talk about them as human beings, well-liked guys in the locker room. I have a good feeling for both of them that they're going to find a lot of success in Calgary. I mean that in earnest. But the Flyers are very clearly now in a position where things are changing, and they are bound to change quickly, guys, because Danny Briere, after completing the deal, goes on TV, goes on pregame with Jim Jackson, and notes that this is going to give the team cap flexibility to go after that center.
Yes, but
was that a flub?
No.
Was that a signal of what is to come? Does that portend a trade? Does that portend
let's
free
just say,
agency? Get into it.
Let's just say this. So I think there was a combination, like this was a kind of a perfect storm of events, right? So you hear the news becomes official from the league about the salary cap and how it's going to go up, right? And it's going up a lot of money over the next several years. It's rare that they announce how many, like this many years in advance, how much it's going up. It's usually year by year. You're waiting to find out what's the cap number going to be next year, right? This time they announce it multiple years in advance, okay? So now teams have a real sense for where they're, and I think that the teams are happy with that because now they have a better understanding of where their cap dollars fit 2, 3, 4 years out instead of just guessing and hoping that they're right and waiting for the league to say something, right? So I think that that's a good thing. So you have that happen. The offense goes in the tank, right? And they can't score goals. They still haven't scored in, I mean, there's been a lot of things that have happened in the world since the last time the Flyers scored a goal, okay?
The trade war started. The trade war is over.
It's exactly.
Guys. A lot of things happen. An entire war. Trade war has started and ended.
A lot of things going on out there. And so when the offense started to go into the tank, and they realized, okay, we're starting to slowly slip. I mean, and it wasn't falling far out of the playoff spot, but they went from being within 3 points of a playoff spot to being within like 5 or 6. And Danny's looking at it and going, okay, maybe now's the time to pull a trigger and get something going so that we can go towards, the bottom of the standings. They probably still aren't going to make it all the way down to the bottom, but they'll probably get close to the top 5, I would think. They look at it and go, okay, let's pull the trigger on this deal and make it happen. Because what they did, and look, I'm not a huge fan of the return for these guys. I thought Farabee and Frost probably were worth more than what they got back. In all honesty, I don't think it was a great trade, but I understand it. And from this perspective, you get out from under 3 years of Farabee at $5 million.
Big move.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah,
right? You get out from that money. Secondly, Morgan Frost, you would have had to re-sign him, and you're talking about, if I'm guessing,
$4 or $5 million.
$4 or $5 million a year for him. So that's and he's not just going to take a 1-year deal. It's at least going to be 2 years. So that's another $4 or $5 million there, right? So now all of a sudden you've just cleared out over the next 2 years about $9 million. Okay. They're still probably going to trade somebody else. I think Ristolainen is probably the guy. I know everybody's like freaking out about the injury, but let me tell you something. If this was a serious injury, you would have heard by now that he's not playing for Team Finland at the Four Nations tournament. The fact that you have not heard that tells you that it's not as bad as you might think. So even if he doesn't play tonight or whatever. But so if you get out from under Risto's contract, now all of a sudden you've just created $13, $14 million of cap space over the next couple of years. And the cap's going up $7 million. So maybe you could start to use that money and chase bigger name free agents. I still don't think the big splash is this summer. I think you're going to see some nicer potential pieces coming in that are support players that could maybe fit on a second line kind of thing. I still think the big chase is 2 years from now, but I think that you're starting to see what the plan is in place. I don't know, Bundy. I look at Farabee and Frost, and I think that they're NHL caliber players.
No doubt.
To get a 2nd round pick and a 7th round pick, a pending free agent and a pending restricted free agent who has underwhelmed so far just seems like the value. They could have gotten better value. But at the same time, I understand that you look at it and say getting out from under those contracts is a benefit as well.
It ended up being the money thing. We often talk about like a hockey trade and then a money trade sometimes. I mean, this was from where the Flyers' standpoint was. For Calgary, it was a hockey trade. For the Flyers, it was a financial trade because Calgary, believe me, it's hard for them to generate the free agents that the Philadelphia Flyers can generate when they're good. People will Philadelphia is a destination. Calgary has a lot of work to do to try to get a free agent, and a lot of things have to go their way for that to happen. So from that standpoint, the best way the Flames or teams like the Flames can acquire players is to actually go trade for them, and that's how you end up keeping them. But for the Flyers, it very much, after you look at it and see who you got back and what was all involved, it appeared to be a financial decision for the Flyers. And whether or not, Anthony, you're talking about whether they're targeting somebody for like maybe not this summer or next summer, it may be even somebody down the road more, where they're looking at the end of another contract on another team and saying, hey, we like that guy.
Yeah.
But you don't want to tip your hand to that, right?
Correct.
Like you can't go out and say, even whisper it to anybody like, we like Jack Eichel. You can't really say that because then you're tipping your hand. You can't do it anyway because of all the tampering rules and getting into the weeds. But I think that's really for what the Flyers are doing. They're freeing up space to what looks like is going to be, for certain, a larger cap and a larger hit number on teams. And that's where I think this makes sense for the Flyers.
There is another possibility here. Nobody's talking about it, but like, in a way, it's interesting, and I think they have now kind of bought themselves even more time. This almost feels like because they've been able to clear out this money, we know dead money, retained money is coming off the cap. In a way, you can almost make the argument this is kind of resetting things. This is almost like resetting year one of rebuild. You could go one of two ways. Because you're clearing out the cap, and because you're probably going to end up with a higher pick, you could probably rationalize internally, all right, we're going to go get that one other elite level player in the draft that eventually is going to be part of the core with Mishkov. And at the same time, because you've cleared out the cap, you can go after free agents, you go after trades. Another element to this is you could play the long game. This cap flexibility now allows you to potentially be a third team in a trade that could bring you back additional compensation or another change of scenery guy. And you take on a contract that has a year or two left that's maybe not the best deal to take on, but because you have the longer view in mind, you could potentially pull back an asset in a future draft. Not that that's what I think they're going to do, but it is another potential option here. They were up against the cap. We all knew this, and you've talked about it a million times. The financial situation that this front office inherited was a horrific one. They might not say it publicly, but it was about as bad as it could be. They now enter the offseason. I mean, I think the last time the math was done, if nothing were to change, they'd have about $35 million in cap space entering this offseason. That gives you a hell of a lot of flexibility with free agents, trades, draft day, beyond.
Yeah,
Even going into next year.
Yeah, some of that's you got to keep in mind. You're trying to save for guys that are currently on a team that are going to need new contracts as well. So you don't have completely that much money in reality. But I mean, but yes, they will have a lot more flexibility than they would have had. I just felt like, and I get it. Like I said, I get it. I just felt like there could have been more return for those two guys.
Can I posit something to you? Because you and I often disagree on this.
Yeah.
I'm usually the one who's more bullish on trade the guy, get rid of him.
Yeah.
Like Risto is almost the perfect example, right? Because the one thing that I kept coming back to is you just don't want him to get hurt. Like if you do make the decision that you want to trade him, you don't want for the second year in a row that teams are kind of putting out feelers that he gets hurt and that goes off the table. You are often the one who says, hang on to the guy because he's going to have better value up to the deadline.
Yeah.
Is there a case to be made that their best window to trade these guys for a return maybe was last year?
Well,
like that they maybe missed that window? Could they have benefited from hanging on to them longer? Do you think there wasn't a better package
I don't know.
could have come at the deadline? Where you at?
I don't know about Farabee. I think Farabee was what he was. I think Frost, maybe you could have looked at the offseason and said he had a big finish last year, looked good in the second half. Maybe that's a guy, if you weren't sure was going to be part of your future, that maybe you could have moved him and gotten more value from him because he put that second half performance on offensively and has that skill set that other teams might covet for a center. I think that maybe there was a little bit more value with him. And then he comes into this season, struggles again. And it's like, okay, well, now we see that there's inconsistency there if you're another team. And you say, all right, maybe his value isn't what we once thought it was. So maybe on Morgan Frost. Farabee, I'm not so sure. I think you with the contract that he had, look, you look at it and say he's a guy who should be a 20 goal scorer, 20 to 25 goal scorer in the league. It's probably worth $5 million. Is probably going to be that. Yeah, he's had a little bit of a slower start this year, but even with a slow start last year, he did still finish with 22 goals.
Yeah.
Right. So I look at a guy like that and say his value was probably his value.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not convinced that they got enough in return, though. Like a second round pick is really all you got out of this. Let's be honest.
Cap space.
And the cap space.